So I think that's what you have to do. You have to have that mentality if you're sitting at the top of your responsibility is to serve and lead people and to empower them. I think people desire for people who can just step in and manage tension. People are looking for the adults in the room.
Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy, and I am here with the incredible Adrian Crawford.
What's happening, Bri? How are you?
Just chilling. How are you doing?
It's interesting times.
It's interesting times.
It's very interesting times, yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's something that you've been thinking about recently?
I think that I just am noticing, man, that I feel like we're in this next cycle. I feel like in 2020, life started to begin to change. Things got disrupted. And then I think then we got used to the new, whatever new normal is, right?
Quote unquote, yeah.
Quote unquote. And I think we're in another disruption again. Like even right now as we're filming, there was a freaking earthquake in New York today. Like, of all places, what? New York, New Jersey, like there was a freaking 5-point on the Richter scale earthquake, which is crazy. I just think we're in different times right now. So just curious for what's there. And I feel like when there's disruption, there's always opportunity. So,
Exciting. More to come on that. But thank you to everyone who listens to the New Rules Podcast. We just want to ask you to please leave us reviews. We really genuinely want to know what it is that you think about the podcast. If it's something that you listen to, especially on a consistent basis, we enjoy everything that everybody says when they see us in person on what they like about the podcast. So we love to hear from those of you who we maybe don't get to see on a consistent basis. We also ask that outside of reviews that you would leave comments on our YouTube videos, TikTok, Instagram, all of the media platforms that we post on. We would love for you to leave comments so that we can engage in the questions that you have. Feel free to DM us and all of that good stuff. Somebody left a comment on one of our previous videos.
Okay.
And we're going to highlight it because it was so kind.
All right.
They said that this is the first episode I've seen, and being from the same generation, Gen Z, I was interested in the podcast, and I love the interaction that you two have. The girl, I'm the girl, asks very interesting questions, and she represents us, Gen Z, very well.
Listen, I want to give
Let's go, Breezy.
I want to give a round of applause for that, but that's the most Gen Z
quote really
you ever read. Like, hey, Gen Z, we're great. Look at us, we're great. Hey, the old guy, he sucks, but hey, Gen Z's great though.
Okay, but why I wanted to highlight it is because we talk about like we really do love
Dude, yeah, I don't know how.
I love my generation, and I really do. And no, you do. Like you really do, and. People talk so bad about us and think that we shit on Gen Z all the time. And so I just wanted to highlight this comment that listened to one of our episodes and was like, they love Gen Z. Like, you're right. We really do.
I mean, we really do. And people, listen, what happens is this. I'm sorry that you grew up and no one ever talked to you in a tough manner or even told you any bit of truth. And so when someone does it, then all of a sudden they're freaking mean. No, they're not mean. They're just like, listen, you've lived under these illusions. And my point is this. I love Gen Z so much that I want to speak truth. You'd be liberated. And here's the thing. The same thing you're dealing with, boomers deal with, Gen X, millennials. Like, everybody thinks their generation is so different. I'm like, whatever, man. Like, they're just like... Can you receive feedback, so on and so forth. So, yeah, I love Gen Z. I'm tired of even trying to have to prove that anymore. I'm like, study the body of work, man. You know what I mean? I employ Gen Z people. I send them out. I mean, get behind them. We're freaking doing an entire podcast. My podcast, literally the dynamics. How do we help Gen Z? Love them. So,
we talk about this all the time too. Like the statement of, a generation is so blanket and so broad. Like, and the only reason that we use it is because it's easily understood and like easily translated to people who are listening to us speak when we're like referencing a group of people. Yeah. But yeah, I
mean, because there's parts of you that you legit have like boomer vibes.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you are very like frugal, like with your money. You think ahead. I mean, you're like a planner. I mean, there's a level of like you like you have the Gen Z. You have a lot of emotion and good like EQ, but then also like you can just like go through stuff. Like, no, it's just what it is. I got to be tough and get through it. Like,
yeah, that's not my starting point. Yes. Like that took work for me to be, emotionally attuned and emotionally aware. Yeah. But my starting point was definitely a lot more like, just get it done. And I still have those parts where I'm like, man, y'all piss me off. Like, just
get it done.
Get over it. Like, and then I have to remember where I came from. I'm like, okay, let me have some grace.
Yeah. So what we got today, Bri?
So today we're talking about where did all of the adults go?
Yeah, where did all the adults go?
What a great segue. Where did all the adults go?
I know, right?
So can you kind of start us off on why it is that you wanted to talk about this?
Yeah, I've been listening audiobook called Burn Book by Kara Swisher. It's called a Burn Book, a tech love story. And Kara Swisher is a renowned journalist, and she's been a part of the tech world since the beginning of it in the 90s, before the tech bubble burst in 2000. So she pretty much all the people we know as these giants and titans in technology, she's known them from the upstart and interviewed them. And so she knows all the insight to it. And as I was sitting there listening to her book, and she's talking about how all of these tech giants start off with these kind of altruistic kind of like things, these views of how they want to go change the world and how they want to, connect the world and how they want to, decarbonize, whatever, all the stuff. But as they start to grow, they become so intoxicated. This is me saying, not her exact words, with the power and the money, that all of a sudden now they're just going to do whatever it takes to keep the power and the money. And so when I thought about that, my mind started to fly, because I'm like, man, right now, currency is this rage is currency today. Living on the outside, not just creating outright chaos, just thinking one side, black and white, thinking all of that, and pushing people there is currency. It gets you power, it gets you money, and what's happened is I think it's left a huge chasm of where there's just no real adults in the room, no leaders that are willing to sit in the room and actually manage the tension. And so it just made me think a lot about it, because I think it's such a space that's so needed right now.
How does utilizing rage as currency equate to being a child?
It's when you think about, having 3 children, children go to extremes. We think about when you're a baby, or kind of a toddler, and you don't get candy or ice cream, or you don't want to eat this. What do? You just rage. You know what I'm saying? You scream, you cry, you're like, whoa, 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 like, dude, it's okay. Like, we're going to get this. And so you go there, and there's no control, and it's just like these huge things, and you're like on something that's really not that big of a thing, right? It's just you're trying to grab, what are they trying to do? Grab your attention, right? And so that's what I mean by that. But as you get older, I mean, how would that doesn't, for us, if all of a sudden, like, hey, Bri, you asked me for a piece of candy, I'm like, no, and then you start crying in the corner, going crazy. I'm like, whoa, it wouldn't be like, oh, man, I would think, okay, Bri is something emotionally is wrong, or she hasn't emotionally grown up at all. If you act like a toddler there, so we would think, oh, there's some developmental things that are wrong there, but we just do that. And so I think children are that way. Children just create so much rage on things that are out there, and actually when you're an adult, you learn how to have healthy, proper emotions, and you learn how to see either side. You learn how to manage it, because you start to realize, healthy adults realize there's just a lot of life is gray, and it's not these extremes.
How do you think that we got to the point where, emotionally immature or just mature individuals are actually the minority? And do you think that we were ever at a point where it was the majority?
Well, I think, again, my thoughts are that it got really increased a lot with the rise of the internet, because now there was a in between. If you wanted to get a message out, you had to go through a magazine, you had to go through a newspaper, you had to be on TV, and there were networks that had that. Now, with the rise of all technology and social, right now, you pick up your phone, what I'm saying, I hold my phone right now, I can go to IG Live right now, and anybody that's following me, and there's people who follow me, here in the States, there's people who follow me who are in Australia, and I can start talking about whatever I want to talk to, and let's say I had a bad day, and I can just start going bananas, right? Well, I'm just creating that now because I have instant access to do that. I think the other reason why it's created that is because when you don't have instant access, you have time to think about stuff more. Versus I feel some way, I'm just going to go do it. I'm just going to go say it. And so then I just kind of create, it doesn't force you to learn how to have resilience. It forces you to learn how to what our parents say, think before you speak. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes people say, my mom and dad used to say, hey, sleep on that first before you do it. And a lot of times when you sleep on it, was true. Like your rage will calm down. You wake up, it's not that big of a deal. But nowadays, there's not parameters that actually keep us from doing that. So we just go do that. And I think you're creating more and more people that don't have emotional maturity, because I think being able to contain and handle your emotions is actually an important part of having a healthy EQ. It's not just being aware of your emotions, but it's the ability to actually be able to restrain and the ability to manage your emotions well.
Yeah, I think that we're talking some about the importance of resilience and self-control in moments of instant gratification. And so when you are someone who, let's say the example that you gave, like use the internet for instant gratification, what's the difference and how do you work towards maturity when you're someone in that position? And what does it look like when you are somebody who is in a position of power and you're using rage as currency in the sense of like, I know this system exists and I'm actually going to utilize this system to manipulate an emotional energy because I know that emotional responses, and if I can make people go against each other, I will actually end up with more money or more power in like what you're saying, rage is currency. Like what is the difference in how you approach it when you're in those different positions?
That was a really good question. I'm going to start with the latter, though. Okay. I'm going to start with like the person who's like kind of, they are now manipulating the system in order to money, power, whatever, influence, whatever they're trying to do. See, I think that is one of the most important things. And I think it's the lack of understanding leadership, because I actually, as we talk about this, I believe a authentic leader is someone who's self-aware, have resilience, remain self-aware, and someone who empowers. I think that your job when you are at the top of an organization or you're leading something is to actually empower people. It's to actually, in empowering people, one of the parts of empowering people is helping leading people to healthy places. I believe that's a responsibility of a leader. I don't believe that the only responsibility you're called to do is to just return a profit. I believe that's important. Or just to have more followers or influence. I believe that's important. But I actually believe it's to help make others' lives better. And I think when you do that, what you're realizing, you have a false view of actually what leadership is. And though you are making more money, I think that's why you're creating absolute chaos more inside the lives of people. And I think it's really, really important that we understand the responsibility that we have as individuals. And I see it all the time with politicians where they will just, it's just only my policies, but they create just outright rage. And they say the wildest stuff, and they don't think it matters. I'm like, no, you're a leader. What you say matters. You have a responsibility to lead people to healthy places, not like crazy places. And so I think that that's where people have forgotten leadership. A lot of times we just think leadership is only influence. Like, no, it is about how do I empower people? How do I serve people better? And so I think that's what you have to do. You have to have that mentality if you're sitting at the top of your responsibility is to serve and lead people and to empower them, not to push them to the edges.
What happens in like the inner workings of people to get to that point? Like, is that where most people start? Is it a process? Like you said, a lot of, in the beginning, the tech people, it's like they have a longer term vision that's more about empowering others and helping people in the beginning. And then slowly over time, it kind of unravels. Is that the case for everyone, or?
No, I actually think that, yes, I think there's probably some people who start off with like, I'm just going to create this crazy, right? Like I think some people, but I think most people don't start that way. I think what happens inside of them, listen, power and money it's so intoxicating. Like being in circles you've never been in. Like, here's the truth. There's some of these tech dudes that get in circles. They start making money. Dude, they're around females they would have never in their life been around. It's because they are freaking millionaires. Or they're now sitting next to a potential presidential nominee. They are now around athletes who they never could hang out with. They now have the ability to influence things, policies, and even an entire nation. That is so intoxicating. And what you do is you begin to do it, and then you start to justify it. It just becomes little small things as you move up the ladder. You're saying, oh, well, yeah, but it's for the greater good. It's for the greater good. And then it's like, well, if I'm not going to be here, somebody else is going to do it, and I know they don't have my intentions, I do. Because here's the other thing. I think people want credit for their intentions, not actual actions. I don't care what your intent is. Let me back up. Your intent matters, but your intent, it has to lead to action. A lot of times people just think, well, this was my intent, but your actions led to something completely different. And so then I would tell people, well, I don't know if that's really your intention then, because I believe your intentions start to play out. So I think that a lot of people, they start ignoring the conscience inside of them. They start going, and they just go and go and go. And next thing you know, they become so enamored with the power and the money. They also, again, if you're talking about a large company, then you become beholden to shareholders. And so now you start living according to that. Or here's the thing, if you're working in an organization and all of a sudden now you're doing sales stuff and you're pushing, but you know how you're creating sales and things like that isn't best for your employees. Like you're creating kind of a little bit of a toxic thing. But why? You feel the pressure from upper management? No, I got to keep this going. And because you have a job, you have a mortgage, you have student loans, you have whatever, you're like, and you have dreams and aspirations, and you bought a boat and you did all this. I got to keep this going. And you'll just start to stop listening to your conscience because those other things become louder.
You know, and I think this ties into even some of what we talked about in our last episode, where it's like groupthink is so powerful.
Yeah.
Like you could live your life and have expectations for your life in one way or one manner and genuinely have those intentions. And within less than 24 hours, because you're in a group of people who are doing things differently, whether that's on purpose or not, suddenly you're acting the way that everybody else acts.
Yeah. And you know, and I think it's because we've talked about this before in a lot of different episodes, but we don't stop to think and to critically think about what's actually going on. So, you know, when you're among a group of people, you're like, I never would have thought about this. Or, you know, I was thinking one way. Then you get around these people. And then what I think happens, people aren't even recognizing it's going on. I just think they just, you know, it's kind of like just being swept out with the current. You know, you're like 2 miles off the beach now. And you didn't even realize that. It's just a slow thing. That's why it's so important that you are constantly critically thinking. It's important to know what are your personal values and why values are so important to guide you, because when those values get violated, those should be warning signs. Those should be it's the electric dog fence. You know, you are out of bounds when one of those values that you started with gets violated. And a lot of people, they have these values they start with, but they end up compromising those values because those values get in the way for them to have more money, more power, and more success.
Okay, let's go to the circumstance where you might be somebody kind of more entrenched in the system that's being manipulated.
I think a little bit is what I just said can work for, and it should work for people who are actually within the system. Is because I don't think we ever stop to question, how are these things impacting me? You know, when was the last time you sat there and you were on Instagram and actually thought about how you felt? Like, well, I'm just scrolling, I'm looking at reels. Well, do you find yourself being mad? Practical example. You know, I deleted, Twitter off my phone, like the app. Deleted off my phone off the app because I found myself every time it would pop up, I would find myself being so frustrated and so mad to where I'm on it for 10 minutes. The next thing I'm like just angry. And I literally one day stopped like, why am I doing this to myself? Right. Like I literally don't have to do this to myself. And I started asking myself, why? Why do I keep just allowing, myself to go down these roads to have this frustration? And then I started asking, well, why am I getting frustrated? And, when I was on Twitter, it was just, it was a lot of this. It was seeing people just go to these extremes about ideas. And then you see thousands of comments of people agreeing with these crazy ideas, no matter if they are on politically left or right, they're just stupid and harmful. And I'm like, and these people are out there just doing it. And they're doing it because they don't care for these people. They say they care for truth. They don't. They've now found a stick that actually gets you power and influence. That's why I laugh at all these people. I laugh at the people who sit on the left and these pundits that, they'll get on someone like a Candace Owens. I'll use her. And they'll be like, oh, she's whatever. And I'm like, you do the same thing just over here. You create rage. And the same thing with Candace Owens. She sits over here and she's like, I don't, I care about all this about Black America. You're like, no. You found your stick and you do your thing and you make money doing your thing. Everybody needs to admit that you make a bunch of bread. Because if you didn't, you wouldn't do it. And so what do? You have to do that. I mean, you look at some of these leaders out there. I mean, you see this all the time. Somebody says one thing and and it gets a buzz. And now all of a sudden, that's all they do. I mean, literally, that's why I think like Ron DeSantis, that's why I think he lost. I think he started off like great, and then he gets caught in this whole DEI thing, and he's like, I'm going all the way down this road, and that's all he kept talking about. I mean, everything would be like, well, DEI, well, you know what, man, it was a hurricane, well, it's DEI related. You're like, freaking no, it's like, no, like it's earthquake, DEI, and it's like, dude, it was so like it's so lazy and boring, right? Or here's the thing, or on the other side, anything that happens, oh man, it was Russia against the, it was Russia manipulating elections. Oh, man, all of a sudden, same thing as a tornado. Man, Donald Trump made that happen. Oh, there's a pandemic. Donald Trump did that. I mean, it's like, dude, it's just no. And so my point is that they start doing this, and they get a bunch of followers, a bunch of people in their echo chamber, and they just keep doing it. I mean, I see it in the pastoral world where people just all of a sudden they say one thing that goes viral. Now, everything they do is around that one thing. Because why? It's because we just love power and influence. And if you don't realize that, it is so subtle and intoxicating. You go down roads and you don't even realize you're down that road. You actually think you're doing righteous work, but you're really deconstructing things. You're really tearing the fabric of humanity. I mean, look at Facebook. The whole point Mark Zuckerberg started off with is to connect the world. I think he's done that. And I also believe in the same breath and that same platform has broken communities and been harmful as well to the world. And here's why. It's because the more power he got, the more influence he got, the more impact he made. What did he do? It's like, oh, it's just starting to justify why he makes moves. Well, freedom of speech. Well, until he got all this pressure from everybody to get Donald Trump off the platform, he's like, well, because why? Freaking the right wing was making him all type of money with ads and vice versa, whatever. I just think that's what ends up happening is that people find their deal. And I know I went down a different rabbit hole down to do this, but people find their different deal. And when they find it, they just stay there and they just create rage, even though it may not be the healthiest thing for the rest of humanity.
Something that, because I know we're kind of talking about what it's like to also be somebody within the system that, all of these people who are pushing for rage as currency, and we're the ones now being enraged and kind of giving them, in some instances, like the power over our lives. Mm-hmm. And so I do think, and I want to be careful in how I explain this, that there is a role that the person plays who is willing to allow something to emotionally provoke them to that extent.
Yes, 100%.
What do you think helps that individual have a greater maturity and a greater sense of self in order to not be provoked in that way? And why do you believe that we are so easily provoked in that manner?
Well, here's one of the things. I think information, we're just inundated with it. And so because you're getting information from all these different access points, and we would encourage you to go back and listen to our pod on access points. But like with these different access points, you can't stop to say, okay, how did this hit me? What's going on in me? Because you're just getting new information. Like this podcast. I go to this podcast. I listen to this audiobook at 1.5. I listen to this podcast at 1.5. I got 3 podcasts and listen. I'm reading this book right here. Then all of a sudden I'm on Twitter and I'm looking at the news that happened on Twitter. Oh, there was an earthquake. Okay, well, what do I do with that? And then all the comments about that. And here's this. And you get all this information. And not one time you stop like, yo, I'm feeling kind of mad or I'm really sad. And you just build that way. And next thing you know, I think a lot of people go down roads not realizing they're down that road. I think that the way that you have to be able to build out and to do that is becoming more consciously aware of what you're doing and limiting your access points. I think we have to start limiting our places of how much information we're intaking because we are training ourselves not to think critically about information anymore because we have it all the time versus saying, hey, I'm reading this one book. That's great. Even that simple practice, read that one book. Don't feel like you have to rush it. Why do you feel like you have to rush to that book? Sometimes we're like, well, I got to read 8 books, or, I got to read 18 books by the end of the year. Why? Like, who put there's not like you're going to die. You know what I'm saying? Like, if somebody's going to come and say, hey, if you're going to read 18 books now, they're going to put you in front of a firing squad. No, it's like you pick that goal. But if it's fine to do that as long as you're thinking critically about what you're reading. And I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing is, like, once we be willing to take our time, that when we are on different platforms or when we hear different information from friends and we're around a group of people and then you walk away, you're like, yo, I feel kind of funny. Like, why do I feel this way? Think about that, because that allows you, that keeps you from going down roads. It's kind of like, I tell people, it's like taking the blindfold off a little bit more.
Something that I'll say is frustrating, or even while you were talking, the mental picture that I got, which ties back to how we opened it, is I was like, I feel like we're just a bunch of kids trying to play Monopoly. Like, we suddenly have all these like resources and these land, and we're like, wait, this is what it feels like to be like an owner or like have these things without direction on how to utilize it. And at the same time, being younger, sometimes it feels like I'm like on the outside watching people play this game and the moves that they make dictate my life. And I also am so uninformed about the decisions that they're making or why they're making them. Like, there's so much propaganda. I have no idea where to get my information. So it's like, yeah, I am just going to watch some funny TikTok videos because I have no idea where to get this information. And honestly, the place where I feel like I've found has been most helpful is something like TikTok. Like, I don't watch the news. Like, first off, anybody who wakes up in the morning and turns on CNN or Fox News, like, you are violent. That is, I think about, just like, I feel like a lot of us grew up in households where that was the thing that you did. And I'm like, that is insane, because I don't feel like the resources were any more incredible necessarily. Yeah. But I do feel a lot of that dilemma of like, yes, I want to be able to critically think and develop my own conscience and have my own levels of self-agency. And so I'm going to focus on doing that. And then what about when I get to the point where I do have those things? Like, what does it look like to credibly impact the world whenever maybe I have become a better adult? How do I, impact things?
Well, I think it's understanding that you're not responsible for the whole world. It's too much for because everyone today has expectations for everyone. They expect, hey, Bri, so, you should know everything about world politics. You should know everything about global trade. You should know what's happening in baseball and basketball, men's and women's. You should know what's going on in the dance world. You should also know what's going on in popular culture among influencers. You should also know what's happening. Man, what does the Bible say, in this? And you're like, dude, how do I know all this stuff? I think because again, we fall into the trap of everyone else's expectation versus saying, no, I don't need to know that information. And if I do need to know that information, then I go to the place and say, you know what? I need the election's coming up. Okay, man, who are some people that are out there that just kind of have is there anyone out there that does nonpartisan stuff? One of the ways, there's a podcast I love. Shout out to the guys at Breaking Point. And it's like, I saw Sagar and Crystal on Joe Rogan's podcast, and they were like, man, Joe Rogan, I love them because they're left and right, and they criticize their sides, and then and it's just, it really is a place for really good nonpartisan stuff. I mean, and man, it's like, I get informed there. So I found that podcast. So I try to listen to that podcast because, man, it gives me information from both sides, and it's really, it's good. I mean, you can research those things and find them when you need it, but don't feel like you have to know everything all the time. I think that's why we become shallow thinkers, because we just know a little bit about everything versus not knowing a lot about maybe 1 or 2 or 3 subjects. And I get it, because it's just why we're just inundated with a lot of information all the time. And so it's just a part of what you're doing. And so you have to be intentional about limiting the content and the intake as you move forward. Generally,
what do you believe are the markers to maturity?
I think markers to maturity for sure is that you manage tension. I think that's one of the first ones. You manage tension. I believe when you live in a place of rage and fear, you go to very simplistic thinking and you don't want to manage tension. Everything's black and white. But I actually believe most of life is gray, and you have to manage the tension. And so you have to be. So when I watch somebody who, I mean, let me ask this question: when was the last time you heard a world leader, political leader, anybody say it was their fault?
I've never heard that.
I think the last time I remember it was that I remember, and again, and I know for all my right-wing people who follow here, you probably will hate this statement, but I think the last time I remember it's like Barack Obama. I can't remember what it was. It was after it was an event that happened, and he's like, "Man, we didn't do a good job with that." And I was like, and I'll never forget hearing that. It was like in like 2008 or 9, whatever. And I was like, "Yo," I'm like, "What in the world?" But like, I don't remember. Like, it's always someone else. But that's a sign of maturity. That's going to my next thing. A sign of maturity is somebody takes responsibility. Mm-hmm. Like, they take responsibility. Another sign of maturity is empathy, to where you can stand firm on what you believe, but also like have compassion for somebody. You're willing to not allow their anxiety to move you, but in a good way or a bad way. You're willing to still have your feelings, but also to care on the other side. Yeah, I think it comes down to managing tension, accountability, and actually empathy. If you do those three things, I think they allow you to show those are signs of maturity that are actually happening really, kind of in your world or whatever. And I think there's other markers for sure that are there, but those three come to my mind right from the jump.
You're raising 3 children. Mm-hmm. How do you teach them to critically think?
I think we really try to do it in a lot of just life moments. So if, my children know this, when they come to me and something's going on or they're frustrated, I'll let them, get it out. And, but here's one question I ask my children now, because, they're old enough. I'm saying, okay, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to help you, or do you just want me to listen? Because what I'm doing right now in that moment, even though it's subtle, I'm making them think. Okay, why? Okay, because a lot of times, what is it? Man, I just want somebody to hear my feelings. And, then I'm going to go somebody else to hear my feelings. I'm going to go somebody else to hear my feelings. I'm going to go somebody else to hear my feelings. And then what you learn how to do is you just become this person who bleeds everywhere. And now what it's doing that moment is making them stop and think about, what do I want? That's just a very subtle way to make them think about what they're really wanting to accomplish in this moment, right? I think another things that I do for them is that once they say, hey, yeah, I want you to help me, right? Then I say, okay, well, what's really going on? Okay, I make them say, what's one thing you could have done better? Doesn't mean that what this person did was off, but what's one thing you can do better? What's one thing you feel like they did that was really this, And because, again, I want them to think about the situation. I help them critically think about, like, they have a budget, that they have an amount of money they get. You need to critically think about that. And in a month, hey, that's on you. So you need to be thinking ahead. So I'm talking, hey, don't forget, you got 5 more days left. And I get the reminder, you only got like $30 left. All right. So that's on you. And they learn how to critically think, right? And so those are just always types of moments, I think, as well, making them when they're making decisions, like talking through those decisions, give us reasons why. And also getting them around people who make them think critically. Yesterday I was in a situation with someone who's a mentor of mine, and with my son Jalen, and he did a really good job of asking questions. And when Jalen kind of would give like some surface level answers, he's like, no, that's not really, no, go a little bit deeper with that. No, like, okay, and it got him thinking. And so whenever you put around people, help them do that as well. I think those are just kind of moments we've had.
How do you help the higher level leaders that you work with learn how to critically think, especially because usually they're in the position to where they're very intelligent and they know how to think about things, but they don't usually have a grid for their own internal conscience.
Great. Yeah, I think the first thing I have to do is I have to get them to become aware of the things that will be blockages from them to think clearly. So a lot of times they don't, they know they're frustrated. They don't know why they're frustrated. They just feel, okay, I'm mad. Well, it may not be they're mad. They're actually, maybe their shame that's there from something. So I have to help them, it's kind of like unclogging like the system so that like thoughts and things could flow a little bit more free. And so that's the first thing that I really have to do with them in that process. Then from there, once they know kind of where they go, because I think everyone has like 3 to 5 things that are kind of like messaging things that really impact you, right? Like, for me, one of mine is like being overlooked. So if I feel in any way, someone doesn't mention me in something where I really help with something like that, I really like help pull something off and no one mentions me, I feel some type of way. And then I thought, oh man, I'll think very negative of those people. They don't care. They, they're taking credit for this. And it's like, man, then sometimes I just talk to them like, oh no, they just forgot. And it's okay. But I know that's a thing for me. So when that happens, I have to, I know this is one of those life messaging things for me. I know I can naturally tend to think really wrong about this. And then I will, kind of correct it from there. So I try to get them to the basement to understand what their life messaging is and then just clearing that system out so that they know how to make just healthier decisions. Because they know intellectually what to do, but sometimes what happens is that there's this intellectual thing and then there's these thoughts from your gut, right? That thing where it's like, and it flows up where it's like, this is not just a 1 + 1 = 2 thing. It's not just I'm looking at a spreadsheet. This is maybe about a human or a decision to make, and it's not really a right or wrong answer. It's just it's good, better, best. And so a lot of times if you don't have that, like I say, that filter and that system cleaned out, what you'll do, it'll get all clogged up because of just broken emotions, and sometimes you can make bad decisions like that.
In some senses, when we act out of extremism, we dilute the real problem. What are ways that you have seen that show up culturally?
Yeah, I've seen it a few different ways. I think the Me Too movement was needed. I think making awareness of power, men using power, and abusing women, it needed to become aware, like at a very heightened level. But what happened with that is that it was there to, bring real awareness to what was going on and bring right things to justice, all the stuff, which I thought was phenomenal. It was needed. But then it gets in the hands of people, and people literally built this entire space and career out of it and followers and what they do. Well, to keep them, you got to keep raging. You got to keep now it's not just, oh, that was a toxic thing. Like, oh, he went on a date with you and you know what? And he leaned in on a date to kiss you because maybe he read the signals wrong. And then now all of a sudden you've said, oh man, this dude was, it was toxic masculinity. He, he was trying to abuse you. And you're like, whoa, dude just read the sign wrong. And it goes down this road. Now what that's led to, it's literally the thing the thing you were making aware has now you're starting to see the rise of the whole toxic masculinity thing because it went so far to where guys now are like, they didn't know what to do. So now they have then it becomes this echo chamber. You get these guys like Andrew Tate and others who create this platform for people. And now that's what's there. Again, Black Lives Matter, great sentiment. With stuff, man, it does matter. The fact to talk about justice for people of color and policing, all that. But what happens, and I say this and I say it very directly, all of a sudden it got out of the hands of the people it was impacting, and there were those who took it and they began to run wild with it. And now all of a sudden everything gets lumped into it. Now when it comes to it started off again, like I said, it was about black people for about 30 seconds. And then next thing you know, far left progressive people started taking this thing and going to Psycho Town with it. Now all of a sudden everything gets lumped into DEI. Who gets diluted? The people it was actually supposed to impact. And so now what's happening? Look in our world today. Now you have the overplay of now in Florida what happens. It's, no DEI anywhere. You're like, okay, well, that's not helpful. Okay. And again, you can blame Governor DeSantis and he's a racist, whatever. My point is this: people, they went to extreme where all of a sudden now you started just going after people who they weren't being racist. All of a sudden we're pulling out Abraham Lincoln statue. I'm like, fam, dog, he was on the team. I know he wasn't perfect, but he's on the team. I'm like, literally, I'm listening to his autobiography right now. What that dude stood for you're leading a country and the country, this republic is about to split in two, and you're like, no, slavery is wrong. And, people are like, well, he did want to send people back to Africa. I'm like, Dude, he fought to get people free, and we're tearing his statue down. That's where it goes crazy. And then all of a sudden now you've had this whole rise now of people who are anti. Now what they can hide under, here's what you've created. Now people can hide under their racism. Now, listen, DEI is the new N-word, like pretty much. That's pretty much what people are saying. You know, DEI, he's a DEI, that's the N-word. Let's say it, right? And so, but it's like, but all that stuff has gone like to extremes, and I get more and more cases of where something that started off good gets in the hands of people that create rage because now they make money and power from it, and they literally profit off of it. Like people profit off of black people's like just their oppression, and it's other black people who do it, and it's freaking insane to me because why? Money and power. I mean, it's the same thing happens with the far right. What happens? All of a sudden, this whole crazy stuff, and and people are like, oh, January 6th, it wasn't as bad as you thought. I'm like, really? And then you go down this whole road and this whole thing, and why? They just make it more rage and more rage. Why? Because everybody watches their stuff. And then here's what you're doing. There are people that are out there that they really buy into this stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you start seeing violence start to happen. And then people are like, I can't believe people did that. No. The leaders, you started this. It's a freaking reason why. Why? And I will say this boldly. My issue with Donald Trump. Now, again, I will be very bold. I ain't voting for either one of them, okay? Because I think they're both buns. All right? But I'm not voting for either one of them. But here's what I say. The issue I've had with President Trump has been this. You incited this. You did. Like your leadership did that. And not to take responsibility for it, it shows me the absolute lack of a leader you are when you do that. The fact of the matter with President Biden right now and what's happening in Israel and Palestine and things like that, and his lack sometimes of leadership is freaking awful. And these guys they go on, they just have these talking points and well, that's not really them. They just do this stupid stuff. I'm like, dude, be a freaking leader. Own your mistakes and help put people in a better place. I'm just longing for leaders to step to the plate to actually manage tension. To say, you know what, man, I didn't do that right. We're going to get better at this. So, like, if I heard somebody say that, man, I'd be like, okay, like they're running for office, I'll vote for you. I don't care what you believe. Like, you just freaking take responsibility. But I do, let me just say this in hope, I think there's a huge space that's available because I think people really want this. I think people desire for people who can just step in and manage tension. People are looking for the adults in the room. And I think we can really build, that's what we're passionate about here at New Rules, is how do we help people become these types of leaders that can manage that bring people together because you're trying to go after one common goal. You don't care how you get to that goal. You're just trying to get it. Well, if you're on the left, the right, you're in the middle, whatever, you're just trying to get there. And I think there's some real ways that we can start creating these types of spaces. Mm-hmm. Well, guys, hey, I hope this is helpful. Would love to hear your feedback. Would love comments. And I want to challenge you out there this week as you go, be the adult in the room. Be someone who does not contribute to rage, breaking the fabric of communities and things like that, either whether if it's what you write, what you say, or even in your job or at home. Be someone that manages tension. Be someone that actually brings people together. Be someone who leads, even if it costs you. Don't do things that are going to continue to keep giving you power and influence to build you up. But, man, if you get power and influence, be willing to give it away. So this week, figure a way to go practice being the adult in the room. Until next time, keep writing New Rules.